Hi, my name is Christian Devine and welcome to Retro View, a safe zone for physical media. I hope you're all doing well. I had intended to do a Retro View on a cult 80s Toho science fiction film, but I'm going to save that for the next one just because there is a new Planet of the Apes film that opened this weekend, and it's kind of fascinating to me how durable this idea and series has been through a couple different incarnations, starting with a 1968 classic, Planet of the Apes, from a novel, more satirical novel by Pierre Bouet, and written for the screen by the late great Rod Serling of Twilight Zone fame. And so I thought I would take a retro view at the only one of the series, original series, that I saw in a theater when I was a kid, and it had a pretty impressionable, I would say almost dramatic effect on me, and was also very exciting and cool. And next to the first one, this is actually my favorite of the Planet of the Apes films.
Watch the screen explode as man faces ape in the ultimate revolution, a revolt of the apes.
This will be the end of human civilization!
Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, rated PG.
And since this is a safe zone for physical media, I'm going to be talking about Conquest of the Planet of the Apes as released in this 5-disc set of all the ape films from 1968 to 1973. And this is a steal deal. I think I paid like $23 used. Fantastic deal, and the versions look fantastic, particularly Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which came out in 1972. And what's really exciting about this particular release, and it was already released earlier, is that it contains the uncut version of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes that would have given it an R rating for violence. And they also changed the ending to make it a little less apocalyptic. And so it was fascinating to see that version, and it totally transforms the film into something even more scary and, kind of visionary in a certain way, because all of the recent Planet of the Apes movies that have come out over the past few years really are kind of have their basis in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, because it's kind of showing how the apes took over, as opposed to Planet of the Apes showing what happened, later on down the road, which the films are getting to. And I also think these new films have been very well made, and they kind of blur together a bit for me. I can't tell the rise from the fall of the Planet of the Apes, but I do appreciate the integrity that the filmmakers show. Now, my one caveat about the newer Apes films is just my personal aesthetic, is that I prefer physical effects and makeup for the apes, because to me that creates an intimacy and a physicality, even though the CG looks, fantastic for the new ape films. But it's just my own personal preference, and I really think Tim Burton's much maligned 2001 reimagining of Planet of the Apes, one of the saving graces of that film is Rick Baker's extraordinary makeup, and some great actors really having fun with that makeup. And I did see one reaction video with somebody saying that they liked the makeup but it didn't look as real as CG, which of course to me looks just as unreal as makeup. And it's just another special effect, and each generation kind of gets used to whatever the dominant special effect is, and it's always evolving. But I do think that physical makeup is becoming kind of a bit of a lost art, and since we're talking about physical media, this is kind of an aspect, an element of that kind of craft. And I also saw a post on social media with somebody saying they didn't like the new Planet of the Apes films because they were too political, which of course is such a self-contradictory statement when you're talking about this series, because if you don't like politics, you should definitely stay away from the Planet of the Apes films since 1968, because the first film was based on a novel and very satirical, and the film itself was done in a more satirical commentary way via Rod Serling's point of view, and of course, the famous twist ending. And each one manages, to be talk about some aspect of society using the apes as a metaphor. Of course, the first one, the apes carry around carcasses of dead people and pose with the dead bodies of their hunt. And so they're making a point about human society and also the deification of faith over science, et cetera, and who's more savage, the man or the ape that we come from. And it's always been amazing to me that the ape films have managed to kind of retain a sort of, continuity, a loose continuity, but it's there. And particularly the last 3 films. And so what I really like about Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is that it's kind of a template for revolution in terms of what happens when the oppressed rise against their oppressors. And as a very impressionable child, this message was not lost on me. And it's a very scary film in the way it's shot, and doesn't have a lot of, the fun of the other films. It's very grim and dark. And of course, this version on the Blu-ray contains the uncut R-rated version. It would have been rated R due to all the violence, of course. And so once again, that makes it a completely different film at the end as opposed to the original. When I first saw it in the theater, what I most remember is that kind of oppressive 70s dystopic dread that hung over a lot of these movies of that genre, Soylent Green and Rollerball, which I talked about a few retro reviews ago, is definitely in the same dystopic template. And the film felt very visceral to me, and I had a lot of empathy, of course, for Ceasar and the apes and the way they're, tortured basically in the rehabilitation centers, and of course how they're treated as, slaves, basically. And it's even got a scene where Caesar's tortured, and I remember being shocked by this scene as a child, and it's pretty brutal. And I remember being in the theater and the film ending on this very apocalyptic note and being very disturbed in a very exciting way, I have to say also, because it was just opening up all these avenues in my young, impressionable mind. And also taught me, maybe at an early age, that it's much better to be on the side of the people that aren't violent oppressors. The film definitely has a political message and very reflective of 1972, which was, once again, the era of the Vietnam War. There were people protesting in the street still, and it was a very political, volatile time. And so this film completely reflects that era and attitude. So Conquest of the Planet of the Apes was a pretty good hit. It made about almost $10 million in 1972, which is, of course, adjusted for inflation, as they say, quite a chunk of money. And 20th Century Fox kept spending less and less money on the films. And of course, they were getting, less and less box office, but still pretty good box office. And if they had spent maybe more money and time and care, they could have kept the series going, indefinitely or so, instead of trying to milk the banana, so to speak. And the lack of a larger budget does hurt the film visually and conceptually, because it's really centered around almost literally a shopping center in Century City. And it's the film that probably introduced millions of Americans to that particular area in Los Angeles. And when I lived in LA, I always got a kick out of walking around there, because all I could think about this is where the apes took over. But the set design is pretty cool. And I really like the command center where the governor and others operate out of. And it does have a really neat kind of future feel. And definitely you can tell by the black guard outfits that they're mimicking a bit of the SS, vibe. And the makeup suffers a bit too, because John Chambers, who also did the makeup for this, as well as getting an Oscar for his work on Planet of the Apes, because of the budget, they become the masks. They don't have much time and money, obviously, to spend on the masks. And they do favor, fortunately, the lead and most important ape, which is Ceasar, played by Roddy McDowall. And Roddy McDowall has been the one consistent through all of the ape films. And this is his shining moment. He's absolutely magnificent as Ceasar and completely believable in his transformation from this gentle, impressionable ape to the violent, powerful, charismatic leader of the ape revolution.
The king is dead. Long live the king!
And in a different world, he certainly would have been nominated for an Oscar for his performance because it is incredible. And that's the main reason the film works, is because of Roddy McDowall. He's always believable, and even through all that latex, you know exactly what he's thinking. And there's only one genuinely funny moment in the film that's intended to be funny. Now, because this is set in 1992 in Los Angeles, there is a governor who oversees all of the ape control, and he's played by Don Murray, who gained fame acting opposite Marilyn Monroe in Bus Stop and received a Best Actor nomination and supporting actor nomination. And he's fantastic. He's just sheer malevolence, and he's single-minded in his pursuit of making sure that the world does not turn into a planet of apes. And I love his black turtleneck collar malevolence. He's just really effective. And of course, Don Murray ended his career on a pretty wonderful note in Twin Peaks: The Return as probably one of the most decent people in the entire David Lynch universe. So he's one of the great things about Planet of the Apes. And one of the best scenes in the film is between Don Murray and Roddy McDowall when the governor allows the ape to choose his own name. And the looks they give each other are just so incredible. And the whole scene is perfectly shot and edited. And of course, the writing by Paul Dean, I'm not sure how you say his last name, is fantastic. And he's a very interesting screenwriter, a relatively open gay man who wrote for James Bond films, was credited as a writer, additional writer, and bringing his, obviously, wit with him, and worked on other films. And this is a great script because it has exactly the kind of back and forth monologuing and dialoguing and debates that I love in movies, where they're debating, big issues. The governor's, evil Inspector Culp is played by the great Severn Darden, a wonderful satirist and character actor who got his start in the famous Second City comedy troupe in the 60s, working with Mike Nichols and Alan Arkin and others. And his first film is The Amazing The President's Analyst, which I'll talk about in another retro review for sure. And he's just stark malevolence in this film and wonderful. And the only sympathetic human is played by Ricardo Montalban as Armando, who brings Cornelius to the city. And he's got some major exposition in the beginning of the film to catch you up on what's going on. But it's always great to see him in the film, and I wish there was more of him. And he's always very true and has a lot of gravitas in his presence. And there is another sympathetic figure, at least sympathetic to Ceasar's and the apes' plights, and that's one of the assistants of the governor, played by Harry Rhodes, a pretty cool character actor, and I really like him in the film. And he brings a nice little kind of balance. The film was directed by J. Lee Thompson, who was most famous for The Guns of Navarone, and his career kind of went in a different direction than that huge hit, but he always had a certain interesting style, and I think there's a lot of style on display in Conquest, the Planet of the Apes. I think it's the most interestingly directed of all the films, next to the first one by Franklin J. Schaefer. This has a lot of neat compositions, and I'm sure he was working in tandem with a cinematographer, Bruce Surtees, who's pretty great. But the film has a really great night look with these corporate buildings in the background, because like I said, they don't really have the budget for special effects or showing even matte paintings of the city, which they probably could have done a couple of matte paintings for this film. But you get the sense of a futuristic environment just with the stark buildings in the background and the lighting and the silhouettes, etc. So of course the film ends, as the title suggests, with the apes going ape and taking over the city. And it's a very action-packed, chaotic, violent scene. And in the original cut that I saw in the theater, and that everybody saw and that was available all the way up until the late 2000s, is at the end of the film, one of Ceasar's ape mates, she actually speaks, and that stops Ceasar from having the governor murdered, basically. And I always thought it was kind of an awkwardly edited sequence, but I had really no clue that the ending had been changed from the original ending, and the film had been even re-edited. I didn't read about that until years later. And of course, being obsessive about lost media, particularly film and deleted scenes, etc., I was always dying to see the original R-rated cut. And lo and behold, if you just wait, it will come. They released that version, and it was a real treat to watch it, because it is definitely more violent, and with close-ups of apes getting shot in the face, and very brutal attacks, and even the apes battering the dead, bloody bodies of the security guards. It's pretty grim stuff. And of course the film's highlight is Ceasar's speech about what's going to happen to mankind and how the apes are going to rise and take over.
Where there is fire, there is smoke. And in that smoke, from this day forward, my people will crouch and conspire and plot and plan for the inevitable day of man's downfall.
And I would say it's certainly Roddy McDowall's maybe finest moment on film. And it's a career peak for him. And it's a shame that he was never really fully honored by Hollywood. He was very beloved and kind of an archivist of physical media, by the way. In fact, his home was raided by the FBI for his personal collection of films that he was collecting simply to keep in existence, because he knew the studios, threw this stuff away. But he certainly deserved an honorary Oscar at some point. And I'm really glad that another generation discovered him in Fright Night. And once again, the Planet of the Apes films are allegories, and the best science fiction, and maybe some of the worst science fiction, are allegories about our politics and social systems, etc. So you can watch these films on many different levels. And I'm glad this one has kind of retained its popularity, and over the years has become a very, very valued part of the series. So that was my retro review for 1972's Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Thank you for retro viewing. Please like and subscribe if you so desire, or just go ape.